Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless Official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Johnny Abbott and Katie Abbott had always loved their grandfather in the uncomplicated, rose-colored way children do, seeing Victor Newman as the powerful, immovable force who protected their mother, who commanded every room he walked into, who seemed to embody success and security. But those days were fading fast, slipping through the cracks of adolescence and awakening insight, and the more they grew, the more they saw the jagged places in Victor's empire and the damage he left in his wake. Especially when it came to their father. With the Abbott Communications launch party only days away, the energy inside the Abbott mansion buzzed like static electricity. Sally Spectra was triple-checking details, Billy was pacing but pretending he wasn't nervous. And the Abbott household was rallying behind this new chapter. This second chance Billy was determined to make work. Johnny and Katie, proudly sporting the excitement of teens who genuinely believed their dad was doing something meaningful, had insisted on being part of the party prep, Johnny offering to help with social media coverage for the event, Katie assisting Sally with design touches and backstage organization. For once, everything felt aligned. For once, it looked like Billy wasn't about to lose everything. But whenever things began to stabilize for an Abbott, a Newman storm cloud always gathered on the horizon, and this time, the brewing thunder was unmistakably Victor's doing. Katie was the first to sense something was wrong. She overheard Victoria on a tense phone call, her voice low, clipped, frustrated in a way that only Victor Newman could provoke. Victoria hated the idea of her kids being caught in yet another feud between their grandfather and their father, but the inevitability of it was already creeping in as Victor orchestrated his next strategic maneuver. Victoria's attempts to keep the kids insulated were noble but hopeless, because Johnny and Katie weren't children anymore, not the kind you could distract with ice cream or reassure with vague promises. They were old enough to recognize patterns, old enough to question motives, and old enough to see the contradiction between Victor's claims of protecting the family and the havoc he continually unleashed on them. By the time Victoria hung up the phone, rubbing her temples in thinly veiled distress, the kids had already exchanged glances of concern, silently acknowledging that they knew exactly who was causing the next round of chaos. Johnny, with the instinctive protectiveness of someone who'd inherited far more Abbott fire than Newman ice, sought out Tracy first. Tracy Abbott had a way of grounding the emotional earthquakes in the family. She didn't lie, she didn't sugarcoat, and she respected the intelligence of her nieces and nephews. When Johnny asked if Victor was trying to destroy the launch party, Tracy's soft sigh and gentle hand on his shoulder told them everything they needed to know. "Your grandfather believes he's doing what's necessary," she offered, the diplomatic Abbott approach. But Johnny shook his head, not accepting excuses anymore. "Necessary for who?" he shot back. "Because it's never us." And there it was, the shift, the realization, the dawning awareness that Victor Newman's empire wasn't a fortress but a wrecking ball, and Billy was once again standing directly in its path. Billy had sensed the storm too, but he tried to keep his anxiety off the kid's radar. Still, he couldn't hide his worry for long, not when Adam Newman was visibly slithering around Genoa City with suspicious purpose. Not when whispers about Victor pressuring Jill Abbott began circulating. The last launch party had been abruptly cancelled thanks to chaos Victor indirectly sparked. This time he seemed poised to shatter things right at the moment of victory. Victor wanted Jill to pull funding, to cripple Abbott Communications before it even had a chance to prove itself, and if Jill refused, Victor would let Adam find another way to break the company apart from the inside. To Victor, it was business, just another chess move in his endless war against the Abbotts. But to Johnny and Katie, it was personal. It was cruel. It was unnecessary. It was yet another reminder that to Victor, power mattered more than peace, control mattered more than family, and dominance mattered more than the emotional impact his choices had on the very people he claimed to love. As launch day approached, the tension spread through the Abbott family like a virus. Sally noticed the shift immediately, the way Johnny was quieter than usual, how Katie's normally bright enthusiasm was dimming beneath unease, how Victoria seemed increasingly torn between her father and her children. Even Jack Abbott, juggling his own battles with Victor as the Newman patriarch prepared a separate attack aimed directly at Jabot, noticed the kid's discomfort. He hated the idea of the next generation being dragged into the family war, but he also knew Johnny and Katie had every right to understand the truth. They were Abbotts, after all, and being an Abbott meant facing conflict head-on, even when that conflict wore the face of a beloved grandfather. The breaking point came the night before the launch party. Johnny had gone to Crimson Lights to clear his head, only to overhear Adam and an associate discussing Plan B, the contingency sabotage Victor expected Adam to execute if Jill didn't fold. Johnny's stomach twisted, anger boiling beneath his skin as he pieced together the implications. Adam wasn't just planning to cause a hiccup, he was preparing to publicly humiliate Billy, to unleash an internal scandal at the worst possible moment, to ensure Abbott Communications launched in disaster rather than triumph. Johnny stormed out of the coffee shop, barely holding back the urge to confront Adam right then and there. Instead, he went straight home, his emotions spilling out in a rush as he told Katie everything he'd heard. The two of them sat on the floor of Katie's room, the air thick with betrayal, both of them grappling with the painful truth: Victor wasn't just going after Billy. He was willing to hurt them too, indirectly but unmistakably, because destroying their father's dream would shatter them in the process. Katie, typically the calmer of the two, trembled with fury. "Why does he hate Dad this much?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "What did Dad ever do that was worth ruining everything he's worked for?" Johnny didn't have an answer. But he knew one thing: Victor had crossed a line. This wasn't business. This wasn't strategy. This was cruelty, cold, calculated cruelty, and for the first time, the kids saw Victor not as the powerful patriarch of the Newman dynasty, but as a man capable of hurting his own family to win a war that should have ended years ago. The confrontation happened the next afternoon. Victor had arrived early at the launch venue under the guise of offering his support, though everyone knew his presence was more of a power move than a gesture of goodwill. Johnny and Katie approached him together, their expressions hardened with resolve Billy rarely saw in them. Victoria watched from across the room, panic flashing across her eyes as she realized where this was headed. She hurried forward, but the kids reached Victor first. "Grandpa," Johnny began, steady and unwavering in a way that reminded Victor instantly of Billy and painfully of Delia, "we know what you're doing." Victor lifted his chin, his expression firm but unreadable. "I'm protecting the family," he said simply. "No," Katie whispered, tears flickering but refusing to fall. "You're hurting it." And the silence that followed was heavy. Dense. Unavoidable. For perhaps the first time in his long, calculated life, Victor Newman didn't have a prepared response. He was a master of manipulation, a titan of industry, a man feared and respected, but he had never learned how to face disappointment from the grandchildren who once adored him. Johnny continued, his voice trembling with anger, "Why does everything have to be about destroying Dad? Why is it always some war with you? We're not kids anymore. We see the truth now. And it's wrong." Victoria stepped forward, her face pale as she whispered, "Kids, maybe we should." But Katie shook her head fiercely. "Mom, no. He needs to hear this." The words poured out like a dam breaking, years of confusion, fear, instability, moments when Victor's choices had ripple effected into their lives without warning or explanation. By the time they finished, Victor looked, not defeated exactly, but shaken. Rattled. Haunted by the realization that his own grandchildren were seeing him not as the protector of the Newman legacy, but as the destroyer of theirs. The confrontation spread through the room in seconds. Billy turned away, hiding the emotion that threatened to crack him open. Jack watched with quiet pride, recognizing the Barnes and Abbott courage in those kids. Sally pressed a hand to her mouth, blinking back tears. And Victoria, poor Victoria, stood caught between the father she'd defended her entire life and the children who desperately needed her to choose them instead. Johnny and Katie walked away from Victor that day, not physically, but emotionally, morally, and spiritually. They chose their father. They chose fairness over loyalty, justice over legacy, love over intimidation. They chose to stand on the Abbott side of the battlefield, and for once, the Abbott children weren't collateral damage in the Newman-Abbott war. They were soldiers. They were voices. They were the consequence Victor Newman had been avoiding his entire life. And as the launch party began and Victor stood isolated at the edge of the room, watching the Abbott family move forward without him, even he had to admit the truth, he had gone too far. Not because he risked sabotaging Billy. Not because he was targeting Jack next. But because he had finally pushed away the one thing even he couldn't replace, his grandchildren. And this time, Victor Newman might actually have to face the fallout. The Abbott Communications launch party went forward, but the atmosphere was heavy, weighted with the knowledge that Victor Newman's presence, or even his machinations, could still cast a shadow over the celebration. Sally and Billy tried to keep spirits high, greeting guests, giving tours of the offices, and sharing laughs that barely masked the tension. Yet even in the midst of that carefully curated excitement, the Abbott children's defiance lingered like a storm cloud above Victor. Johnny hovered near the tech setup, checking the livestream feed and social media updates, while Katie moved between the party planners and her mom, offering suggestions and keeping an eye on her father. Both kids had taken it upon themselves to become unofficial watchdogs, eyes and ears for any Newman sabotage, ready to defend their father and the launch that represented so much more than just a business milestone. Meanwhile, Victor, though outwardly calm, was anything but. He had been caught off guard by the children's confrontation, a jolt to his self-perceived omnipotence that left him stewing in private. He could see it, the way Johnny's eyes followed him across the room, the way Katie's jaw tightened whenever he approached. And as much as he hated to admit it, he had underestimated them. Underestimated their intelligence, underestimated their loyalty to Billy, underestimated the very real moral compass that had guided them into standing up to him. But Victor Newman didn't dwell on mistakes long, he recalibrated. If the direct approach failed, he would have to escalate, and this time, the stakes would be higher. His next move against Billy would be more calculated, more subtle, and, in his mind, ultimately unavoidable. Victor called Adam into his office shortly after the confrontation, his face hard and immovable. Adam, ever the opportunist, sensed the tension immediately. "They're on to us," Victor said simply, his voice low. "Johnny and Katie. They've seen through our little game." Adam raised an eyebrow. "Kids are smart. But smart doesn't mean they're powerful. They're just kids." Victor shook his head. "No, they're not just kids anymore. They're witnesses. And witnesses make things complicated." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle before continuing. "We need a plan that hits Billy where it hurts without tipping our hand too obviously. Subtlety will be key. And I want Jill on standby, just in case she decides to play along. This is a chess match, Adam. Every move counts." Adam smirked. "And what about the kids? You think they'll just sit back?" Victor's lips curled slightly. "They'll sit back, or they'll watch everything crumble. The difference is perception. The truth is still mine to control." And with that, Victor's eyes gleamed with the cold calculation that had earned him his reputation in Genoa City. He wasn't done, not by a long shot. Billy, on the other hand, was oblivious to the precise contours of Victor's plotting but acutely aware that trouble was brewing. He felt it in the pit of his stomach, a familiar tension that gnawed at him during moments when he should have been celebrating. Sally noticed the unease, and though she tried to reassure him, the truth was clear: Billy Abbott wasn't built for uncertainty. He thrived on action, on progress, on control, but Victor Newman had a way of stripping that away in seconds. And now, with Johnny and Katie involved, the stakes were exponentially higher. This wasn't just about business anymore, it was about family, legacy, and protecting the people you loved. The first sign of Victor's interference came the following morning, when emails to Abbott Communications investors began to mysteriously misfire. Rumors of a financial discrepancy, a supposed oversight in the launch budget, circulated quietly, intended to rattle the investors before the event even began. Sally caught wind of it first, noticing a series of panicked phone calls and cryptic emails. She alerted Billy immediately, her voice shaking as she explained the situation. Billy's brow furrowed, but he refused to panic. Okay, he said firmly, we've handled worse. Let's get ahead of this before it snowballs. He began working the phones, reaching out to investors, clarifying numbers, and trying to calm the brewing storm. But the shadow of Victor Newman loomed in the background, a reminder that no matter how prepared Billy was, some battles weren't fought with spreadsheets or presentations. Johnny and Katie, meanwhile, had taken matters into their own hands. They spent the day monitoring communications, tracking discrepancies, and piecing together what they suspected was a deliberate sabotage. Katie noticed patterns, emails disappearing, files being altered, sudden unexpected cancellations in scheduled meetings, that pointed directly to Victor's interference. Johnny, ever the tech-savvy Abbott, cross-referenced logs, traced IP addresses, and even caught anomalies in Adam's recent access points to the company network. Together, they began to map out the scope of Victor's meddling. The realization was sobering. This wasn't random chaos. This was deliberate, precise, and designed to hit Billy hardest while keeping Victor's involvement invisible. By mid-afternoon, the tension reached a boiling point. Billy and Sally were preparing for the keynote presentation when a call came in from Jill Abbott herself. She sounded flustered, defensive, and oddly hesitant. Billy, I don't know what's happening with the accounts, she stammered. I'm seeing things I didn't authorize. Maybe we need to pause the launch. Billy's eyes narrowed. Jill, I don't understand. You approved everything. We triple-checked. Jill's voice dropped. I know, but Victor called me last night. He said, and she trailed off, leaving the unsaid threat hanging in the air like a guillotine. Billy clenched his fists, rage and frustration bubbling inside him. It was the same game, the same manipulations, the same cruel control Victor wielded like a weapon. But this time, Johnny and Katie were watching. And this time, they would not let it go unchallenged. Victor, sensing his indirect sabotage taking effect, prepared for the next phase. He had planted subtle doubts among the investors, strategically leaked a rumor that Abbott Communications might be over-leveraged, and ensured that Adam had placed key staff members in positions that could be leveraged for maximum disruption. Everything was designed to destabilize Billy's confidence, create friction among the team, and, most importantly, test the loyalty of the Abbott family. But as Victor smiled to himself, imagining the panic he was about to unleash, he failed to account for one crucial factor: Johnny and Katie Abbott were no longer passive observers. The kids confronted their father later that afternoon, huddled together in the temporary office set up for the launch. Katie's eyes were fierce, her voice trembling but determined. Dad, we know what he's doing, she said bluntly. Johnny nodded in agreement, pointing out the evidence he had compiled on his laptop, logs, emails, and discrepancies all pointing to Victor's meddling. Billy stared at them, initially overwhelmed by their intensity, but gradually the anger and pride overtook the confusion. You too, you've been keeping track? He asked, a mix of awe and disbelief in his voice. You've been fighting my battles behind the scenes? Katie shook her head. No, Dad. We're not fighting for you. We're standing with you. We're not going to let Grandpa destroy everything you've worked for. Johnny added, we're your family, not his pawn. And if he wants to play dirty, we'll make sure he can't. Sally, overhearing the conversation, felt a swell of emotion. Here were the next generation of Abbotts, stepping up to protect what mattered, refusing to be collateral damage in Victor Newman's endless war. For a brief moment, the chaos of the last 24 hours felt almost manageable. For a brief moment, the Abbott family had a chance to reclaim control. But Victor Newman never let a moment of peace last long. As evening fell and the launch party officially commenced, Victor executed the next phase of his plan. He appeared at the event with his signature calculated charm, greeting guests with warm smiles and polite words while mentally ticking off the steps of his strategy. But the Abbott kids were ready. Johnny positioned himself near the tech booth, monitoring every live feed, every potential disruption, while Katie circulated among the staff and investors, ready to intercept any attempt to destabilize the proceedings. Every time Victor approached, they exchanged a subtle glance, silently coordinating their responses, creating an invisible shield around Billy and Sally that he had not anticipated. Victor, increasingly frustrated by the invisible resistance, decided to escalate further. He cornered Jill in the VIP lounge, whispering urgent threats about her investment and the potential fallout if Abbott communications succeeded. He wanted her to act, to pull support, to create a public scene that would humiliate Billy and demonstrate Victor's unassailable control. But Jill hesitated. She was torn, loyal to Victor in some ways, yes, but increasingly aware of the cruelty of his methods. And when she looked around the party, she saw Johnny and Katie watching, vigilant, unwavering, and she realized that for the first time, the Newman patriarch might be facing consequences beyond the boardroom. The crescendo came as Billy took the stage for his keynote address. The lights dimmed, the audience hushed, and the energy in the room shifted to electric.